What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to try and put together some form of articulate review for episode 3 of season 4 of Succession, an episode that was called Connor's Wedding, but it might as well be called like The Red Wedding, just to keep it all in the family of HBO in terms of how thunderstruck I was by this goddamn episode. And I should mention that it was written by Jesse Armstrong and directed by Mark Mylod. And they are always the dream team when it comes to this show, and they always deliver the strongest episodes. And I'm going to be honest, usually when I review or show a movie, I scribble down a few notes, I try to come up with a few zingers, a few key points, and then I record it and, move on with my life. I have no idea what to say, and I think I'm still processing just the weird conflicting emotions I felt while watching this, because initially as the episode got started, I was saying to myself, like, God, this whole thing feels kind of like overwrought or kind of like, I don't know, over the top, or like the dialogue just felt so scattered. And it felt like needlessly verbose and it all just seemed a little unhinged. And then when Logan started to die and they're doing those crazy shots where he's out of frame, I was like, is he fucking with us? Like, is the show fucking with us? Like, what is going on here? I almost felt that same sense of confusion and desperation of his kids while they're on speakerphone trying to find out what's going on. Like, I kept thinking, because Logan's my favorite character on the show by far, is this some sort of angle he's playing in order to try and manipulate the sale to the Swede? I mean, I was just, all these hypothetical scenarios were running through my brain, and I guess I was as much in denial of what was happening as the character of Roman. And Roman obviously was just completely, totally at a loss, confused, unable to process. And I guess that's part of the brilliance of this episode, is that it managed to create the conflicting, confusing emotions in the viewer that you experience when you deal with the loss of someone in your own life, whether that's a friend or a sibling or a parent, loved one, spouse. We all deal with loss sooner or later. And, during that time, you just start babbling, you say confusing things, you can't quite remember the sequence of events. It's all just so overwhelming because somebody who's such a huge part of your life is suddenly just gone. And I feel the same way about this show. Brian Cox was a colossal presence. He was they describe him as a titan, his character as a titan in the context of the show. But in terms of his dramatic persona, Brian Cox, he displaces air and space when he walks into a room. And that scene in episode 2 where he's addressing everybody on the floor of ATN, that was like some Shakespearean fucking go-to-war shit where he's like, we're going to be leaner, quicker, faster. I was getting so fired up watching that scene. I was like, oh my God, this season, he's just going to take over the world. Woo! And I was getting really pumped up, and I feel like anybody who does any sort of content creation of any kind, if you're ever feeling like you need a good kick in the ass, watch that scene from episode 2 of season 4 of Succession. And now, he's just gone. No goodbye, no farewell. And the diabolical genius and/or just cruelty of this episode is that in the same way Roman's wrestling with the strange final words that he shared with his father in the voicemail and what he was asked to do, we're left with the same conflicted feelings towards the character, because obviously the character of Logan Roy represents many things, and many of his qualities are quite reprehensible and just flat out evil and selfish. And seeing him being so dismissive and so quick to skip his own son's wedding because he wants to go try to work things out with the character of Lucas Matson, and he's making some dismissive reference to some gift that he's going to send to Connor. He can't even remember the details of the gift. And I love how, or I guess I was floored by the fact that when Connor first finds out that his father's dead, he just says, he never liked me. Or what was the exact line? Yeah, he never even liked me was his first line. It's funny, I was taking notes while watching the episode, and about halfway through, I was just like my finger was hovering over the iPad, and I realized I couldn't take notes anymore. I was that confused and enraged and absorbed by what I was watching, because there's a large part of me that was disliking the episode. I was like, I'm not liking the dialogue. I'm not liking the plot. I'm not liking how it's giving me the answers that I crave. But I think that was done deliberately by Jesse Armstrong and Mark Mylod. They wanted to create confusion and anger, and they wanted to create just a whole spectrum of human emotion. in the audience. And so while I'm not going to be getting the episodes that I want moving forward, more scenes of him, addressing ATN, acting like a total badass, I guess we have to just accept the fact that the character is gone, and we still got 7 more episodes of this show. But it's like, what is there left to discuss? Like, where will the drama be? Where will the conflict be? This was one of those rare situations, I can't remember the last time this happened, where an episode of television rendered me speechless, where the episode ended and I just kind of sat back just like what the fuck is this show going to do moving forward? Like, what's it even going to be about in his absence? And it reminds me a little bit of that scene where Roman holds up the phone and shows the share price of Waystar Royco and how it's dropped by a dramatic margin in his absence. And I feel like a lot of people are going to feel the same way about this show. In the absence of Brian Cox, like, does the whole kind of package or the appeal of the show just drop off a cliff? Because obviously they've assembled an incredible ensemble cast. There's an incredible staff of writers. They know how to create great drama for television, but everybody is going to have to pick up the slack and do a lot more heavy lifting, because you can't replace that void that is, there's no way to fill the void left by the absence of Brian Cox unless everybody just really starts to bring their A game. And as I was watching the teaser for what's coming later in the season, I was like, all right, I guess I can still be good, or I guess I can get re-engaged. I guess all the storylines now are going to have to kind of start over. It reminds me like in like MMA or boxing, when suddenly you have a new champ and there are all these new potential matchups, and like the old champ is gone. And it just feels like the world has shifted beneath your feet. And it does look like there's some interesting comedy coming our way. But yeah, I guess my hat is off to the writers and the performers of this show, that they were able to completely confuse and frustrate and bewilder me to such a degree, because obviously it shows that they've done an amazing job of drawing me in, getting total investment in these characters and these storylines. And it's like Ned Stark getting beheaded at the end of toward the end of the season 1 of Game of Thrones, where I'd read the books and I knew that was coming. But I remember at the time seeing on these reaction videos and just cracking up, just seeing how people were gobsmacked by what had happened. And obviously when the Red Wedding came, once again, people were just collapsing. And friends who knew what was coming were like filming their friends and like waiting to see them collapse. But obviously nobody knew what was coming with this episode. And what's incredibly ballsy on their part from a creative standpoint is our last impression of Logan is just a resoundingly negative one, where he's not even sure if he's going to be able to make it to Connor's wedding. And obviously all Connor wants is to be perceived as a success in his father's eyes. And as we learn over the course of the episode, there's this thing called loony cake, because when his mother was basically like forcibly shoved into a loony asylum when he was a kid, they kept feeding him cake to keep him calm and kind of keep him subdued. And I mean, I just could not believe some of these revelations. And Connor is such a sad case, and boo-hoo, he's a billionaire. Like, how much pity do you want to feel for him? But he's just such a wounded, broken creature. But at least he got to lock things down with Willa toward the end of the episode. At least he got to seal the deal, get married. His life will continue in some way, shape, or form. But what was so merciless about some of those final exchanges with Logan, when he tells Roman, oh, like, I plan on calling Connor when I have a minute. I mean, it's just so dismissive, where it's like, of all the things on his agenda, Connor ranks very, very low in his list of priorities. Or the way that Logan asks Roman to get rid of Jerry. I mean, Jerry, as she says, she has this great line, I danced us through a thunderstorm without us getting wet, which is a very clever turn of phrase. But she's been a brilliant lawyer and very an incredible asset to the family. And he was just going to get rid of her. As he says, as he's getting on the plane, cleaning out the stalls, strategic refocus, a bit more fucking aggressive. I mean, he is just on the warpath. And I guess he just got too goddamn intense and his heart just fucking popped in his body. And historically, this show's always been able to kind of do this delicate dance where it's partially like really cruel and merciless, but also hysterical. And if you go too far in either direction, the show feels like it's lost its way. Because I've heard people complain in the past about how the show starts to feel like it's just a bunch of people insulting each other, which I think is fair. But if it's just a bunch of people being evil to each other, that also gets a little unbearable. Like hearing Tom describe to Greg, and I was laughing, but kind of, warily, But when he tells Greg that he's got a couple people Gregging for him, all of his little Greggies, it just shows how even with Tom, like Tom is such an unusual character where he's so isolated, and obviously he married into this family. He opted in for this cruel treatment, but I feel like everything he receives from Shiv or Logan or whomever, he just takes it all out on Greg, and obviously Greg will probably go on to inflict the same cruelty on others. We already got a taste of it in the previous episode, but it reminds me a little bit. For a brief time I worked at the William Morris Agency, and this was actually 2000, and at that time a lot of agents would be really cruel to their assistants, and it's not like the assistants ever like received like payback or justice. They would just grow up to be agents themselves and be equally cruel to their assistants, and the cycle continued. And I feel like we see that on display kind of unfolding in this show. So I think the episode is starting to kind of like settle in my brain, and I can accept what happened. And I recommend everybody watch the little documentaries that HBO posts at the end of every episode. They talked about the unusual way this episode was filmed, and I feel like you can feel the results on the screen. But they did this fascinating thing where all the scenes with Kendall, Shiv, and Roman, they shot them all like you would ordinarily would over several days, over I think 2 weeks. And the actors were talking about how difficult it was to remain in that emotionally high-strung state where you're bawling and you're crying and you're angry and you're confused and you're accusatory. And then how do you let that go when you go home at night? Like, they felt like they'd gone through a trauma even though they had not. But then after they had gotten all the footage and all the angles, then they did this incredible experiment where they shot the whole thing in sequence, like one long, like one-act play. And that's tough to do when you're shooting on film because your typical camera has about 10 minutes of footage on a reel of film before it has to be replaced. So what they did, so they could have continuous action, they set up all these cameramen where whenever somebody's like reel was out, they would be quickly reloading while other cameramen would be picking up the slack. And I thought that was fucking genius. And I think that's one of the reasons why the emotions of that scene feel so goddamn intense. And Mark Mylod in the interview after the fact says that most of the footage that we saw with the three children on the boat, that fucking boat, even like in the middle of all this insanity, they're like, is the boat moving? Like, where the fuck are we going? I mean, amidst even tragedy, you could still find the laughs. But I think that's one of the reasons the emotions just felt so goddamn intense, is that the actors are in the moment and they're not having to like kind of start and stop. They can just go and really let the emotions flow. And holy shit, yeah, the filmmaking on this, and I do say filmmaking, I don't use that word lightly, but this is not TV. This is a 4-season fucking movie. And if you're shooting on film, as far as I'm concerned, you're just a big, long, serialized film in my eyes. And what's incredible is how HBO in their own way is being just as diabolical and manipulative and clever and brilliant as some of the characters on this show, because I only heard about this a day or so ago where Eric Kane, the writer for Forbes, who also has a cool YouTube channel that people should check out, he was talking about, I think in an article, about how HBO had sent out no press screeners of any kind to anybody prior to this episode because they were worried about leaks. That's obviously a big problem on like House of the Dragon, big problem on The Last of Us. They didn't want this leaking out at all to anybody. And I think that was just absolutely genius on their part. And I'd actually tried unsuccessfully to get access to press screeners for the show a few weeks ago. I sent out an email to every single buddy in PR working on the show, and they all completely ignored me. And at the time, my feelings were a little hurt because I'm able to get press screeners from like Netflix and Amazon and some other people. HBO is a little bit more difficult. They're definitely a little bit more I guess they like to maintain a tighter control over who's getting access to their content, and more power to them. But I guess the good news is we all got to be shocked and horrified and amazed at the same time. And I still can't get over the fact that like one of the main emotions I was feeling throughout the episode, in spite of being overwhelmed, how often I was intensely disliking what I was seeing. Like there are times where Roman's like being a bit too quick with like the rapid fire insults to people, or whatever the case might be. And it almost felt a little bit at times like the actors were improv, and like the inmates had taken over the asylum, and like that rigid structure and professionalism had fallen away. But the more I think about it, the more I think there was like a method to their madness, and they just wanted to create an episode that would be emotionally bananas for the audience to experience, so that they'll be talking about nothing else until next week. And yeah, we still got 7 episodes to go. I have 0 predictions of any kind because in the absence of Logan, I don't even know if the show's about anymore, but I will definitely be tuning in very curious. And I guess the way I feel towards Jesse Armstrong and Mark Mylod is a little bit the way that the children felt towards Logan when they're on the phone with him, speaking into his ears as he's dying, and they're saying things like Kendall tells him, "I can't forgive you, and I love you." And I feel like that was a great way to describe his emotions. Like his father meant so many things to them, and he could be so heartless and so cruel and so dismissive, but they owe everything to him, and they're just completely in awe of him. And they're just like they've been unable to escape the shadow of their very powerful father. So I guess the big question remains is, to what degree can these different characters define themselves in his absence over the next 7 episodes? So let me know what y'all think down in the comments below. I imagine that we're going to see a wide range of reactions, where some people are going to say, like, the best episode of television that they've ever seen. Fair play. There are going to be some people like, why was it so scattered, and why was it so hysterical, and why did it seem so sloppily written at times? Like, I think that's totally fair play. But I think most people are just going to feel a delightful, delicious, confusing, like cocktail of emotions all brewed together, like a really wicked drink that never should have been conceived by human beings. And people are going to remember this fucking episode for a very long time. No matter what you think, love, hate, indifference, anything in between. If you watch this in real time and you're a fan of the show, well, shit, people are going to be talking about Connor's wedding for a long time to come. At any rate, I'm going to wrap this sucker up. Thank you for bearing with this completely, totally incomprehensible, babbled reaction. But I figured it was better to get like the raw, immediate emotions, kind of the confused emotions. And I'm sure by tomorrow, I'll have more or less kind of settled on what I think. And I probably just need to rewatch the episode to really lock down my final opinion. But I thought it'd be more honest and more interesting if I just expressed my confused mix of emotions, as opposed to trying to digest it and like craft a really like specific professional response, because that would, I feel like I would start to kind of hedge my reactions or hedge my opinions. And sometimes it's better just to lean into the emotional side of film and television, because that's what draws us to this shit in the first place. Pure raw emotion, pure raw cinema. But goddamn, this show just so fucking good, and I can't sing its praises nearly as much as it deserves. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and hunt me down on Twitter if you have a really interesting take on this episode. But thank you so much. I can't even speak. Thank you so much for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.